Welcome back. You're listening to Ask the CIO, sponsored by Pega on Federal News Network. I'm your host, Jason Miller. My guest today is Jim Jaffer, the Assistant Secretary for Information and Technology and Chief Information Officer at the Veterans Affairs Department. Jim, before break, we're talking a little bit about acquisition. Let's move over to kind of this idea of the changes you've made, whether it's to systems or software or to broad infrastructure technology. How do you ensure that those will continue to be the norm and not the exception just because we had this pandemic? And I guess the big question is, of those lessons, which ones can be applicable, obviously, to non-emergency situations?
Sure, yeah, and we, we talked a little bit about, the pandemic. We talk about a lot of success stories, but certainly along the ways, the pandemic exposed a lot of deficiencies, right, and things where we need to make investment. We talked about that in terms of cloud, but largely our digital strategy remains intact. You talk about software. One of the challenges for the VA and any federal agency is around development. We've got about 800 systems in our environment and applications, so we're constantly looking for, how do we get those into a more refined ecosystem? What can we decommission? And then I think one of our pushes is, how do we build the common platforms and really create a low-code, no-code environment so that when we look at development and enhancements that have to occur, be they in the pandemic or outside of a non-emergency situation, how can we respond a lot faster, right? Because a lot of the VA legacy systems, like a lot of federal legacy systems, are not written on those common platforms. They're not written in a low-code, no-code environment, and so certainly we're going to be looking to accelerate around that. I mentioned also that while we were en route to a pretty deliberate strategy around an operating expenses methodology, right? Cloud being part of that, and managed services being another part of that. We really didn't touch on that much. We're going to look to accelerate that because, again, it does a couple things, right? One, it exposes the true nature and the true cost of the enterprise. One of the things that VA is doing is we're a leader in the whole technology business management effort, and so we continue to refine our cost towers and cost pools and managed service and cloud and common platform environments really allow us a much accurate picture around our day-to-day costs and get us to that operating expense environment. So you're going to continue to see us press on that. We'll always have a balance, I think, across the enterprise in terms of on-prem versus off-prem. But again, I think our responsibility as we look for that cost efficiency is to make sure that we are also identifying the true cost, and sometimes those get masked when we don't have that true OpEx mentality.
I had a great conversation with one of your folks on TBM. I know that's a big effort for VA. Just real quick, you're seeing some benefits from that already. You're seeing some, how did TBM play into this pandemic environment?
Yeah, I think right before the pandemic too, we were able to present, we were talking about a multi-year plan, and we were able to present to the administrations kind of what their burden cost was too, right? Because people often look at the enterprise costs and they say, what do I get out of that, right? And it kind of goes back to the tick gateway conversation. What do I get out of a highly functioning and efficient, a tick gateway? Well, what you get is you get access to those applications that we built, right? And without that reliable and durable enterprise, what good is the world's finest and most premier application? And so with TBM, we were able to show the administrations and the staff offices, hey, budget-wide, enterprise-wide, here's what we're spending on you, direct and indirectly, to provide you those services that, you so desperately depend on, right? All three, certainly our healthcare business line, VHA, my question is always to them, like it is in the commercial industry, is at what point do you become a tech company that delivers healthcare outcomes, right? And so you really can't short sheet your technology because it is becoming, the critical, indispensable aspect of your care delivery. And I know Dr. Stone appreciates that. VHA's model, for example, is care anywhere to anywhere, and you only do that with technology.
That's a great point, and there's obviously more to talk there, but let me jump ahead to another question here around this idea of citizen and customer services. VA has one of the largest customer bases of probably any agency, a very specific one who demands more from you every year, every day. How did those challenges you face with your technology environment, how did you solve some of those to ensure that your citizen services, your service to veterans continues to be excellent? You guys have, I'm going to get ahead of you, Jim. You guys have done an excellent job with customer satisfaction and customer service, raising it over the last 4, 5, 6 years. How'd you ensure that during the pandemic you didn't lose ground?
Yeah, no, and let me hit on that too. And I don't want to miss an opportunity to kind of brag on our folks too. You know, we even outside of the trust scores within VA, which are very substantial, and I think the secretary and others have done a great job of advertising those. Is our ranking in our American Customer Satisfaction Index cohort, and we've gone from an ACSI of 70 to 79 in just about 5 months. Which, you know, inside of a pandemic, maybe it's a surprise, maybe it's not, but that would truly indicate that our business partners feel like, you know, we're on par in our cohort with Microsoft and even above Google in terms of delivery of outcomes. And so I think that's pretty good company. You know, we look at our digital strategy again, and, you know, one of the reasons that it's called the Office of Information and Technology, not IT, is because of the things that we're delivering directly in terms of information and data. And I'll cite a couple of kind of broad examples. Number one is our corporate data warehouse, Mr. Jack Bates and his business information security line, services line, excuse me. They have provided the CDW resources around a national toolbox so that VHA and Dr. Stone and his team on their daily calls, twice a day calls, could have what they refer to as their single source of truth. It's the CDW, for example, that also supplies the Access to Care website so that folks have that transparency around the fourth mission and what VHA and VA are delivering in terms of capacity and capability across the country. So that's one I would highlight in terms of our business value. The other one is our efforts around va.gov, you know, and our digital customer experience, our veteran experience. And so we continue to migrate from across a number of platforms and consolidate these functions on our va.gov platform. You know, one of the examples is we used a chatbot to help really veteran self-service. So you want to do some sort of self-screening and get some of your questions answered. And our Chief Technology Officer, Charles Worthington, our digital experience team, within 2 weeks put that together. There's a digital screening tool that we put together. GSA is now using the code for that for facility screening. So there's just a number of examples. And I tell you, you know, we often give our veterans kind of short shrift, and, you know, and maybe even myself as a veteran, you know, you feel like there's certain cohorts that aren't digital savvy. But I was at Reagan Airport last October, and here's a 94-year-old World War II Army Normandy veteran in a wheelchair, getting ready to board early on the flight, and there he is working his smartphone, right? And so we know that our veterans are using the digital channel, and we're continuing to accelerate our journey around delivering connectivity and applications on va.gov, on mobile, so that our veterans can meet on that place and on that channel.
Jim, obviously great news about the increase in the customer satisfaction scores and over the last 5 months alone. We're just about out of time, so let me just wrap this up together. The pandemic required you guys to move fast, move with a sense of urgency. It also enabled others across VA to understand the value and the importance of technology. Give me a sense from your perspective, where you sit as the Assistant Secretary and as the CIO, how's it going to get you to think differently around the future of your technology infrastructure to continue to drive these mission outcomes?
Right. Well, and I think, you know, this is kind of a summation, a lot of the stuff that we've talked about. You know, we realize that our digital strategy is sound. Now we just need to accelerate on all aspects of it. We're probably going to be accelerating around cloud, right, to provide that scalability, that flexibility. Certainly around telehealth, I don't think any of us would have predicted. There was a time about the middle of April where there were more daily telehealth visits than there were on premise. You know, none of us probably would have predicted that except for a once in a century pandemic. Telework and our business model, you know, as I travel around in a very, very limited fashion here and certainly talk to our business partners, you know, the theme is kind of very similar to what you hear across commercial sector and certainly around the rest of the federal government. It's a new day. We're not going back necessarily. What are going to be the provisions and the opportunities to continue around telework and remote access? And you look at the tools that we have out there, right? I mean, we had the largest single day deployment of Microsoft Teams in our environment. And, OIT used it starting in March. We eat our own cooking. We've done a lot with it, and we've introduced it as our business partners have wanted. And when you look at the opportunity around some of these video and other collaboration tools, it's a phenomenal experience. And it allows an increase in productivity that I think none of us really would have expected. And so I think the challenge for those of us going forward is, our business partners, like any other federal agency, are going to have a huge appetite for these things. They're going to have a huge appetite around the additional employees that we're onboarding. How do we demonstrate our need to have the right resources and budget to deliver around these capabilities? Often people, when they think of OIT or any information technology office, they go right to the technology, right? And they don't kind of fall into the, worn out paradigm of people, process, and technology, right? So, we've got to make the case around our investments to meet that growing demand, because I can tell you in 2020 and beyond, VA, as any other federal agency, is going to have a much greater need and requirement for these technology, for these tools, for remote access, for telehealth. And ultimately, it's all about serving the veteran and their caregiver and their survivors. And it's really accelerating their digital experience, around va.gov and the other platforms that we have.
Very true. Once the genie's out of the bottle, it's not going back in when it comes to the remote working and all these tools that are much easier for everyone to use. Jim, this has been a fascinating conversation. Unfortunately, we're out of time for today, so we would love to have you back on. First, let me thank my guest, Jim Jaffer, the Assistant Secretary for Information and Technology and Chief Information Officer at the Veterans Affairs Department. Jim, thank you so much for taking the time today.
My pleasure, Jason. Thank you for the time.
I'm Jason Miller, and you've been listening to Ask the CIO, sponsored by Pega on Federal News Network. For more on this discussion, visit federalnewsnetwork.com and search Ask the CIO.